Welcome back to Turn Down for What, your source for EV news and updates. Like and subscribe for more content like this episode. Let's dive on in.
Welcome back to Turn Down for What? Another day?
Another episode.
There we go. Welcome back, Chris. So today we have a fun conversation. We got Chris Bowe and Jesse Hensley, our traditional co-hosts, and we have the privilege of having Chris Kaiser, former guest of the podcast with Sona Energy, and John Carson, also a former guest of the podcast with Armagh Capital. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Absolutely. So today we are actually coming to you live through our different channels to have a discussion around some recent guidance that's taken place within the, the EV space. Obviously, since the administration changed in January, there's been a lot of questions on LinkedIn and some of the other platforms where a lot of these industry leaders are. Lots of feedback and thoughts around some of the current initiatives and movements by the administration. And so we wanted to come on today, bring in Chris, who I would classify as an industry leader, John, who I would also classify as an industry leader, to have an open discussion with everyone in regards to thoughts around some recent guidance. Also thoughts around a letter that was released by Federal Highway yesterday, but also looking at our thoughts on where this is going and how it impacts infrastructure and the EV industry as a whole. As many of you know, Jesse and I have built a company around some of these grant programs and are working diligently to make as much impact as we can across the Southeast with what we're doing. And this does directly affect, us and some of our current awards and things that we're working on doing. And so just having a discussion around what we think is, the current guidance, what's happened, and where we feel like this is going as a whole. So, So looks like a great and fun conversation to have today. And so who wants to kick us off? Let's see. I guess I'll get kicked off. So going into the administration change, obviously the president was inaugurated at the end of January, as is tradition. And, we went into it. We had an episode of the podcast, Turn Down for What? Going right back after the election. The day after the election, we posted an episode talking about what does Trump's election mean for the EV space. And at that time, we had dictated several thoughts. And if you haven't checked it out, you can go listen to it. But just talking about how we felt like there might be some targeted movements based on what he said and some of the other things that would make logical sense targeting against the potential for some of the clean energy initiatives, the wind, and things that we have since seen through executive order. The question became what additional steps would be taken. We were talking about maybe the tax credit removal for the $7,500 for the purchase, and we were talking about would there be effect to the grant programs and how a lot of those funds had already been allocated to the states. And so that has been what's been in the spotlight for the last 2 or 3 weeks. Is looking at, okay, hey, look, here is the allocation of funds, but now what can the federal government do to get their fingers in, mess up the current funding allotments that's been taking place to the states? If you're a listener listening to this and you're unaware of the grant programs, in 2022, there was the guidance passed through the bipartisan infrastructure law. As part of that bipartisan act, there was funding allocated through the Department of Transportation to all of the states. There was a $5 billion allotment for the NEVI program, National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program. This was designated funds to the state. It was allocated based on the state size and population, I think EV density. There was a specific formula used to dictate those funds, and every state across the nation had an allocation of funds. Their requirement was that at the onset of the program, they had to submit a state plan that had to be approved by Federal Highway that complied with all of the NEVI rules. So every state starting in 2023 in 2024. At the end of 2024, and now at the end of 2025, would have to submit a plan that would unlock the funds for that fiscal year. And so every state up until this fall had released 3 years of plans. Year one's plan factored in the first 2 years of funding. So every state would have had the first 4 years of funds approved and allocated through the NEVI program guidance that was in place. And so then it was up to the state to turn around and dictate the guidance based on the NEVI rule for how that program was to be implemented within the state. And so that allocated all the funds to the states, and that was the program that Jesse and I have primarily been working through and have received several awards in. So with that being the case, there was also an additional $2.5 billion, which we'll talk about briefly with the group, that was allocated towards the CFI funding that was run directly through Federal Department of Transportation. So there was a $7.5 billion total allotment. It was obviously a priority of the new administration. They directly targeted that day one with the funding freeze. I think was mainly targeted towards some of those funds and other clean energy funds that were being allocated, but also looking at some of the subsequent executive orders and guidance that was being released. That was what had come under scrutiny. The question became, what is the actual right and the ability of the federal government, specifically the executive branch, to influence or alter the funds that have been in place? And so that's kind of how we introduce our discussion today. Is there's the backstory. That's where we're at. But now with the administration change, there's been certain things that have been done. And I will let John, since I've talked a whole bunch here in this 5-minute monologue, I will let John kind of give a summary of what happened yesterday. Give your thoughts on the executive order and what that happened, and then also the letter that was released yesterday.
Absolutely. Well, Josh, great to be with you and great to be with your listeners. So I guess what we do at our firm, we obviously monetize the credits, but really more than anything, we're just educating taxpayers as well as developers and installers. What are the facts and what is likely to happen? I spend a lot of my time more than selling credits. I tell people, okay, here's what is going on now. This is what we know and this is what we don't. You mentioned the letter that was sent by USDOT yesterday. This basically suspends the approval of the NEVI infrastructure deployment plan. Yeah, thank you. That letter. I think this is all part of President Trump's executive order that he has directed various secretaries to carry out. I think a lot of this is how long-standing is this going to be? It's going to be dependent on some court action, which I think is likely to happen and so forth. So it's going to be some back and forth. What I would say is to installers, what we know as of right now is that the new funds out of the federal government to the states not likely going to happen anytime soon, not until all this is resolved. What I do believe is that the 2024 credits, in other words, credits awarded for Section 30C installations of alternative fuel recharging property, those tax credits for tax credit year 2024, those are absolutely good and can be monetized or used by the installers. 2025 tax credits, those can absolutely, as of right now, that would literally take an act of Congress to repeal it or rescind it or what have you. And I think it's very, very unlikely. In fact, there's very little congressional precedent for upending that kind of action in the current calendar year. So I think as far as 24 credits, those are good. As far as 25 credits, those are good. And I think, Jesse, when you and I were talking, I think about a week ago, we mentioned that so much of the federal money that was originally authorized under the 22 infrastructure as well as the Inflation Reduction Act, a lot of that money, maybe a majority of it, has already been sent to the states, and a portion of that has obviously been awarded through the NEVI grants in various rounds. So I don't think it's the end of the world by any means. 24 credits are good. 25 credits are good. The awards that for monies that are already with the states, those are in process. And I think I have not seen evidence of this, Josh, but I think a number of states are not inclined to send back their funds that they've been asked to. And so I think it's kind of let's find out the facts. And to me, those are the facts as of right now. And this letter from Miss Biondi, she's basically carrying out orders from the president, and we're going to see how this plays out with judicial action.
And John, if I can hop in, and Josh, maybe it might help. So listeners who aren't as familiar, it might help to clarify the distinction between a NEVI grant and a federal tax credit, because those are two different things that both could have separate implications, but it might just help to clarify how those monies flow, whereas the grant gets paid upon project completion and the tax credit gets realized, I believe, at the tax year.
Yeah, and obviously those are two distinct entities, and I mean I think that the connection will still be intertwined as far as how that correlates and some of the initiatives of the administration. Something else important to note is, with the letter yesterday, there has basically, the guidance was basically that all of the current obligated funds, as you see on the last sentence of the page, all the current obligated funds were allowed to continue in order to, not disrupt the current financial commitments that's been already obligated. But there's a distinct difference between allocated and obligated, and I think that's a common confusion. There's a whole question of the legality behind the actual recension of the plan, but nonetheless, funds that have been allocated means that the states have been a lot of that money. It's going to be very difficult to claw that back. Obligated is when a project's awarded, it's contracted, and then the way that the federal grant program works is that the grant, once you get the whole contract together with the potential vendor, it gets sent to Federal Highway, and then they take that funds from allocation and they pivot it to obligation, and that's the funds that are currently untouched. Jesse and I have several awards that are awarded but not obligated, and so that's where there's that fine line between, we have a site that we have been committed to by the state, but the federal government has done no such obligation. And so that's where there's that interesting line between the two. And the question becomes, what is the precedence for the states that have gone through the programs and done all of the work to get to an awardee status and not gotten to the point of obligation through Federal Highway because they're working through the red tape that's been in place. And so what does that indicate moving forward? So it's an interesting time for that. And like you were saying, Chris, there's the whole grant program, but for us and our business, the tax credits comes after construction, and then if you qualify, then you can apply based on location and some other variables, and that tax credit could then be issued out and processed accordingly. If there's any other thoughts you want to share on that, Chris, you're welcome to.
There's a lot of thoughts I can share on the entire conversation.
Give us your brain on the whole thing. Give us your thoughts.
Yeah, how much time do we have? So there's a lot of issues to drill into, right? So I think the first thing is, and I posted on my newsletter, amped about EV charging this morning, about the illegality of this issue, right? And part of my titles are provocative, right, to get people to click on the link. But I thought about it, and what inspired it was I saw Jigar Shah, who used to lead the DOE Loans Program Office up until last month or whatever, make a comment on a journalist, I think it was the Inside EV's journalist, who wrote an article last night on this topic. And Jigar's comment was, "This is illegal," right? And his exact comment was, "This is illegal, period. Everyone has to remind folks that all of these moves are illegal." And that's Jigar Shah's quote, right? And this is someone who used to be a high-ranking government official. And so that's, if we bucket what these individual issues are, one of the issues from a very high level is the legality of these moves. And so the lawyers can debate and the courts will debate that. But I think what's a little bit disheartening for me to use, to say that as nicely as possible, is the intent behind these moves is to hurt EV charging companies and EV businesses. That is the intent, is to hurt businesses. And I'm I work for a small business. I'm a partner in a small business. I'm assuming PowerUp's a small business as well. We're all part of probably small businesses or have friends or families who run small businesses. And I think it's important to stress the intent of this move is to hurt EV charging businesses. And that angers me and that's upsetting to me. And the administration has their reasoning for that, but at the end of the day, that is one of the main purposes, is to hurt these businesses. Because so now if we move into how the NEVI program works, right, is Sona, we haven't pursued NEVI for a lot of reasons. One of it is the complications and how much work you have to put into writing and submitting a grant, and as PowerUp knows. But it takes a lot of time and effort. And that time and effort is money that is at risk, meaning PowerUp doesn't get paid until the project gets funded. And that's not even correct. PowerUp doesn't get paid until the check clears your banking account. So Josh, to your point about obligation, right? And I was commenting on Electric Era's Quincy Edmund Lee's. I'm actually on a EV charging reliability webinar with next week, but he posted 12 hours ago about, hey guys, this actually isn't that bad that the letter states that, I'm looking at the exact language here.
I saw that comment and I saw the response. Yeah.
So the last sentence of the FHWA letter says, until new guidance is issued, reimbursement of existing obligations will be allowed in order to not disrupt current financial commitments. And so, Josh, as you said very well in the opening, what does obligations mean, right? Because the sentence right before that is, since FHWA is suspending the existing state plans, state will be held harmless for not implementing their existing plans. So what I think people overlook sometimes is NEVI was designed, I think it was designed very well, but it was designed that the states, each state, and in fact, I think it's 51 because Puerto Rico has its own plan. There are 51 different NEVI plans, and each state is responsible for operating and distributing, running the bids and distributing the funds. And I think and if you're, a small government person, that's a good way to do it, right? The federal government distributes the money, and then the federal government distributes the money to the states then distribute it to the winners of the RFPs. And that's a pretty smart way to do it. But what that means is states who do not support electrification now have an excuse not to distribute those funds, whether they're obligated or not, or depending on how you define obligation. So Quincy's post, I think, implied that, well, the FHWA has money obligated to the states, so everything's good. The states are going to disperse those funds. But I don't think that's accurate, because the FHWA can distribute money to the states, but according to this letter, it says states will be held harmless for not implementing their existing plans. And so states that do not want to implement NEVI now have an excuse not to implement NEVI. And I'm guessing PowerUp might have some programs with some of those states that may be less enthusiastic about implementing NEVI, or maybe not. I know there are states who have already said, all right, we're putting everything on pause. So I think on a high level, people are looking at this and saying, okay, well, it's not that bad. But if you're a small business and you were expecting to get a $600,000 check in 8 months when you finish construction on these projects, on a high level, you may say, okay, well, you're not getting into 8 months, you're getting into 18 months, no big deal. That's 10 months of money that you were expecting that you're not getting. And so some small businesses may become insolvent at that time, right? Because these projects, what people who don't do this for a living, and I do develop, fast charger projects, they take so much time and effort. I tell people it's a year sales cycle, and then it's an 18-month implementation cycle. That's 2.5 years from when and that's if everything goes well, right? And as we know, there's hiccup along the way, but it's a 2.5-year process to find a site and then to get that site turned on. That's 2.5 years. If everything goes well, if there's hiccups in the way, it's not like let's assume, and I'll be really optimistic, that, right now this letter says that they're going to review everything. They don't put a timeline on when they're going to finish the review. So could they review things until November of 2028? Probably. I don't know.
Spring, but it's the federal government, so
Yeah, right. I mean, and trust me, they're under no rush to review this. it's like they in the movie Office Space where they move the people reviewing this to the basement, but they're allowed to take their staplers. So let's say it's a 6-month review process or a 4-month review process. That doesn't just mean your process is delayed by 4 months. It might mean your projects are delayed by 6 months, right? Because a 4-month delay on one end, it's not a straight one-to-one relationship. So anyway, I'll kind of quit pontificating, but I think it does. This definitely hurts small businesses. Whether you think EVs or EV charging is worthwhile or not, I think that fact should not be overlooked because we all feel it.
Go ahead, Chris, for a second. Go ahead.
I had a question about how when we think of NEVI in terms of the charging, what about the funding for like our friends at Kempower, Alpatronic? I know that Ford is announced moving battery production from Poland for the Mach-E back to Michigan, and a lot of that was involved incentives for manufacturing. Are these part of the same initiatives and funding programs? Is NEVI, is this exclusively talking about the chargers? Because there's the federal tax credit for it for buying EVs. I wasn't clear on, is this specific to the state funding for charging, or does this reach more broadly into tax credits for manufacturing and these companies that have set up shop in the U.S. and battery production?
If you're talking about the letter yesterday, the FHWA letter, it was specifically around NEVI, and that's why I think it's important to not, because people who support this letter want things to be confusing, right? They want everyone to get confused and to muddy the waters, and so that's why I think it's very important to bucket and classify each thing. So this letter was specifically around NEVI. John was mentioning the tax credit, which was, a separate, I believe NEVI was under the bipartisan infrastructure law. The tax credit was defined under the Inflation Reduction Act. So I think it's very important because all of these things are going to be under attack. And I think if there's confusion and the waters get muddied, it helps the attackers. And so I think for people in the industry who are, trying to fight back against something we believe in, you have to be clear and concise about what we're talking about and when and whatnot. So
I think the biggest thing for me, just having been in this space, I mean, like you were saying, Chris, Jesse and I started our business over 3 years ago with the idea of making an impact with this funding and doing more than just chargers in a parking lot. We wanted to do community impact, educational impact, and it's taken 3 years to get to the point that we're at today, which is still unobligated awards that we're working to construct. We're very proud of what we built in the Southeast and really making an impact, but our footprint is the Southeast. We really want to make an impact in the Southeast, and that buckle of states, I think, is a lot more, like you said, in line with what there's been resistance to the EV movement. I'll say that. Something that, for me, I didn't get into EVs for I didn't buy an EV for anything other than the fact that I was making an economical choice that made sense for me. And at the time, and Jesse had pretty much the exact same story, we saved thousands of dollars in fuel. Jesse's number was somewhere in the ballpark of like $15,000 of gas a year in what he was doing. And my number was probably closer to 10,000, but it was still massive economic savings for utilizing an EV and being able to charge from my home. I think that, in my opinion, the EV mandate is a very strong thing to have ever suggested for the American people. There's obviously the environmental considerations for that. At the same time, we are a nation that people have the right to choose, and forcing people to buy EVs is a stretch. And so I understand that sentiment. And at the same time, we've had this conversation multiple times on the podcast. EV shouldn't be a politically stigmatized thing. If it makes sense for you, it makes sense for you. And if it doesn't make sense for you, it doesn't. But the important thing for us is, if you look at I think the one biggest thing that the NEVI program did, and that you saw the repercussions of it after that was in the NEVI program, they made requirements for Buy America compliance, which forced a lot of manufacturers, like you were saying, Bo, that, all of a sudden these manufacturers who were making products in Europe, making products outside of the country, were forced to set up manufacturing in the United States. So Alpatronic, Kempower, and all these companies had to build manufacturing in the United States, source more parts out of the United States to qualify to make chargers that would qualify for this program. When the program announced, they'd come out, I think, with the requirement was 90% made in America. They had to alter that because so many people were so far away from it. They altered that at the beginning as exemption to get companies to push into that. And so you've seen hundreds and thousands of jobs created out of that because of the fact that that's now been done in the Southeast. The other side of that coin is the EV space. A lot of people, I don't think, realizes this, but the EV space as a whole has done a tremendous amount of investing, especially in the Southeast. I did a little research the other day. There's been over $85 billion of investing by OEMs and other companies, battery manufacturing companies, into the Southeast alone for EV production. You have Ford with their $6 billion plan, or whatever the total number will end up being, in Memphis. You have Blue Oval also doing the investment in Kentucky for battery manufacturing. You have Rivian and Hyundai in Georgia. There's a lot of other battery manufacturers, and Volkswagen, and all these companies are making significant investments that are creating jobs, and it's all to manufacture and produce EVs and the like. And so there is a use case for individuals for electric vehicles and for the need for electric vehicle charging infrastructure. And, by potentially altering that, that could, potentially affect the outlay of these companies and the investments that they've made going into this. We had posted, I think, Martin's comment before, looking at how we overspend, but at the same time, the ball's in motion. And so that's something that, you can maybe reface it to make it look better in regards to, this is maybe less red tape and pushing the infrastructure through. And at the same time, there's this need to protect the businesses and the job creation and the economic development that have taken place, because protecting $85 billion of investment with, $4 billion or whatever that final number ends up being of charging infrastructure seems like a worthy investment if it's saving and helping those companies doing all that investing.
Josh, if I can jump in real quick, because it's something you mentioned. I saw a comment just came through about an EV mandate, and just like Jigger called out that hey, these actions are illegal, I want to say something. There is no EV mandate. There has never been an EV mandate, and yet people are justifying actions that the Trump administration is taking because they think there's an EV mandate, because people are propagating that lie in order to further the cause, right? So I think it's very important, and this is an issue I'm passionate about. There is no EV mandate. There never has been, and I don't think there ever was one considered, right? So I think
with Chris.
What's that?
California with Chris.
Yeah. So I mean, I think there's a couple layers to that of perception, and maybe you can clear up and kind of clarify your thoughts on this, Chris. Is being out here in California and working for a worldwide transportation company. There were things coming up here in California that 35% of manufacturing vehicles sold needed to be EV. When it comes to drayage and things at the ports out here in Long Beach and Oakland, as a big transportation company, we've spent the last 2 years going to ACT Expo, trying to find people that make, Class 8 vehicles, trying to find charging hubs for these vehicles. You can't get, transformers when you go to do our stations.
So I agree on all that, but furthering, let me rephrase my statement. There is no federal government EV mandate.
Yeah, but there's a lot of states that attach themselves to the California CARB rules. And while there's no federal EV mandate, what they did do is they set up EPA standards such that the only way to achieve them was de facto increasing your EV presence or to buy credits.
Here's where I think we have to, we have to stay very disciplined on the messaging, right? So we're talking that now, again, things get muddy, right? And again, people who oppose EVs want to muddy and they want to sow confusion. So people who support EV and electrification of transportation have to be structured and disciplined in discussing the topic. So already in your statement, and again, I'm respectfully disagreeing, but there's a federal and state government, then there's passenger electrification and fleet electrification. So in your statement, you've entwined federal and state policy and passenger and fleet. So if you look at NEVI is specifically passenger vehicle public EV charging, right? And yet Trump and people on the campaign trail used the word EV mandate as justification for, I'm assuming, issuing this FHWA guidance, which attacks NEVI, right? And so I want to make clear, there was no federal EV mandate for passenger vehicles. And I think, I think it was Marty's comment below, there's a large perception by the public that the federal government was going to force them to buy an EV. And that is false. That there was never a mandate. And if that was the case, I could absolutely understand opposition to that, right? Because I do believe that America is based on the freedom of choice and the freedom to make your own decisions. And yet, at the same time, that the government has to look out for what's the best interest in the long future of America. And they do that with industrial policy, which, Josh, to your point, creates jobs. And they do that with military policy and et cetera, right? So there's this combination of freedom of choice, but also planning for what's best for the future of Americans. But I think when we throw out things like mandate, you have to be very careful, because what happens a lot of times is people cling to that and then they justify actions based on, oh yeah, we had to do this because there was this mandate. And it's like, that didn't exist. Now, are the state of California's requirements on fleet operators logical or not? I don't know, but that's an entirely different conversation that should be treated as such, and not lumped into federal obstruction of previously approved congressional spending.
And I will say California has backed off very recently, that guidance too, by the way. That was, and a lot of those things weren't legislatively, didn't have teeth in them. They were goals, they were guidance, they were things that could always be adjusted. So in fairness, they're not, legal mandates that were set in stone. They were, and just the past few months, they've had to go back and revise those dates, which is certainly relieved some pressure from.
And I see in Marty's comment about a 2035 date, I honestly don't know. But I think even then,
just to interrupt, I think there was an executive order issued by Biden that was talking about converting all of the federal fleet by 2035 to EVs. But I don't think that would hold much ground, because that was just an executive order passed during that term. But that's federal fleet. That wasn't passenger vehicle mandates, I don't believe.
That's right. And I think I think talking about a proposed rule that goes into effect in 10 years that is not a mandate. A proposed rule, like a mandate, to me, a mandate is a law that goes into action now or in the near future. But I think we can talk in the next 10 years, look, there's going to be a lot of changes in the world and, with AI and everything. So you could talk all day about pontificating what's going to happen, but we don't know. All we can talk about is what is the reality now. And the reality now is there is no mandate. And yet people are, opposition to EVs electrification they're pretending as if there is a mandate now in order to further their goals. And they're knowingly lying. And as we know, lies travel faster than the truth. And lies are harder to correct than the truth, right? So even if someone tells a lie and they say, oh, it's actually not true, people say, well, they're probably thinking it anyway, right? And so people use that lie to start justifying their own behavior and their own perception. So I'm very, this is probably the most important issue for me, is let's make sure the facts are correct first, because if you're in opposition to something, by muddying the water and sowing confusion and not even arguing, and that's, there's been public comments, excuse me, on what the administration is trying to do with this flurry of activity, is they're just trying to muddy the waters and sow confusion so they can keep, doing what they want to do in the background. And so if we take that bait and we don't get the facts correct, everyone is disserviced.
There's something that we mentioned in our episode following the election was there was the whole campaign notice of, there's been $8 billion of funds for 6 chargers. And, although, yes, there'd only been 6 released, there's hundreds and hundreds like us in the pipeline of the red tape of government. I think both Democrat and Republicans that had grief with the red tape and process it had taken to get that pushed out. But this year was the year that all of it was about to really unleash, because all the states finally have plans or were about to release plans. And so some of those lagging states were starting to catch up. But now, once again, like we just said, the water's muddied. But I do think that there's that importance of just understanding, the truth behind the matter and understanding what the implications are moving forward. But, that's something that, there's a lot of interesting things happening, but it's just curious. One, the actual federal, like I said at the beginning, the executive branch's legal ability to do some of these things. Like you saw with the federal funding freeze, it was immediately rescinded by a federal judge because it was illegal. And I think, Chris, you had said, and like you had said, that the other individuals had said, this action to rescind the state's plans is or might be illegal in that instance. But that's just where understanding that. But now there's going to be legal headache coming forth and understanding what that might look like to the EV space and those other leaders that are working in the space trying to implement infrastructure.
Well, one thing I want to mention here is, to your point, Chris K, about disinformation around the language. You have that happen a lot with that exact program. Even yesterday, I was listening to Rogan, and he had Brett Weinstein on, and they got into this when it's talking about the programs that has had a lot of money. And to Jamie, his person there even mentioned, hey, well, that's not the case, and then went into the details. So they got off of it. So there's at least people out there that throw that out. I think it would be good to kind of clarify, where that money is, how it's supposed to help. But what I'm going to say here is, when I look at this, it is a different mindset and a different leadership that's going to take this money and do it their way, not the way it was done. And the question there becomes, is it going to be better under the next 4 years using those funds through the FHWA that way, or is it as good as it would be getting or would be today? And there's a lot of problems with the way that the requirements were, in my opinion. When you go through there and you have a lot of EVs in the United States, the majority are Tesla, but then you say, but we're not going to allow NACS to be included. You're alienating the majority of owners of vehicles that can't use that system unless they have an adapter. And then there's a lot of headaches there. That's one reason from the very beginning we had NACS and CCS. The second thing, you're talking about economic opportunities for these areas and working out of these charging stations. I've got a truck. There's a lot of trucks on the road. If I have a trailer hooked to me, I can't charge without doing a bunch of headache trying to get to a charging station. Why was there not more interest in trying to create economic benefits other than let's just throw these 150 kilowatt stations in the corner? We are picking a system that is a 400 kilowatt because we know that's where the system is going. So when you see these 150s, how long is it going to take for those to be obsolete? So here's millions and billions of dollars going into something that, in my opinion, was obsolete because you can't upgrade them to go to 400. So there's a lot of things there that I think, and my hope, I have no clue. I'm not an expert in what they will do. And first thing I want to do as a joke is tell the government what they're going to do for me and then wait to see it to come true. Because, it's everybody's guesses. But I also know that there's a lot of red tape we had to go through. There's a lot of headaches you have to go through. So my hope is, this document basically states that we're going to do it our way, in a way that has the best economic impact for these communities. We're going to support that system, because it doesn't say we're taking it away. It says we're going to change it in some way, and you need to resubmit based on what we want, not what they wanted. And I hope that it benefits the job creation, and it benefits the opportunities of all of these car makers in the Southeast, and all these jobs in the Southeast. Now, I might be very optimistic and none of that happens, and this is a way to tear the system down and maybe keep the money from coming in. But for me, it's all about what the intent is. And to your point, Chris, you're saying it is to hurt the industry. I'm on the optimistic side, saying that if it eliminates red tape, if it allows NEPA to go to the wayside because the benefit of EVs outweighs that program, if it allows for more freedom to use that money to create jobs, to buy those American-made parts, in my opinion, that's going to create a bigger economic engine and be more beneficial. It's going to allow Ford to sell more. It's going to allow Rivian and Georgia to come in there and sell more vehicles. That's what I'm hoping for. I could be wrong. Again, this is just where everybody's guessing at this point.
Like you said, Jesse, I think that the important thing to note in the letter was that, you know, basically they intend to revamp the guidance on the formula program. The question becomes, what is that guidance? You know, for me, and Jesse, I'd say as developers using the program, you know, we've dealt with over a year of red tape with the federal government, and we've not even, like, there's only one site that had gotten through the environmental clearance because of the amount of red tape and headache that's associated. But, you know, the eliminating of red tape and the potential, the only other thing that I would think that might be even more beneficial to the U.S. Based infrastructure, if anybody from the government happens to want to take my opinion on that, you know, I think that you could look at working to force stronger parts being made in America to encourage more job creation out of the United States, and to promote those companies to continue to use more for local steel and local battery manufacturing, whatever that might look like. But that's also something that, you know, in this program, the question becomes what in this can be you know, changed and what should be changed based on that allocation.
And even in those statements, though, I think it'd be you should be cautious about, is the red tape the federal government or is the red tape the states? Because some states have already gone through several, like Colorado, Pennsylvania, already had good, robust EV charging programs that they then, and that's why they were ahead. And I know the folks, you know, in Colorado pretty well, because we used a different state grant that was part of the Volkswagen Dieselgate that funded some of those funds. But they already had that infrastructure, so they were able to roll out programs very well, which tells me that the red tape was not fault of the federal government. The red tape has to deal down with the state issue. So I think in talking of these issues, again, it benefits when there's
push back on that one, because the state of Tennessee did have to pass a special law in order to utilize the funds in the way that they had. So though I agree some states had already done this,
but that's the state, that's still a state issue.
But
that's still a state issue, not a federal issue.
For us, NEPA is a federal issue that could be 6 months to 2 years. And because we're trying to fill the gaps in rural America, we care about the people that are underserved. We don't care about in big cities. We'll let everybody in those areas have those spots. If you're a Loves or Pilot and you're listening, you do a great job. We don't want to go to those areas because they do a fantastic job at their applications and serving the public. We want to go to these areas that are harder to get to, that have no economic opportunity there for this initial natural investment. So when we do that, a lot of times it's on greenfield developments. And in doing so, we are at the beck and call of the federal government. And that could have been changed when you look at the recent executive order for the data centers, for example. That data center executive order that President Trump put through eliminated NEPA for data center development and some other things. I don't know how they have the exact letter in front of me, but it did allow that investment to come in because it's the economic impact outweighs in that situation. Now, do I want to see animals killed? No, you still have to have your environmental done. You still have to do it, but it's not that federal side. It is state and local. And again, that gives power back to the states for their own developments. And I feel that is a positive step in this direction. Just to your point, Colorado might be able to do EVs a lot quicker and better than Tennessee because they have been doing it. Why would you hold that back on anybody because the federal side wants to review it when the states know how to take care of themselves? So we do know they have some of it.
I'll say in the nation, Kentucky was probably one of the states that did it the best. They had already gone through 3 full rounds of funding and had gone through 2 awards and 2 rounds of contracts, and they're already obligated. I mean, Lauren McDonald had posted a post talking about Kentucky specifically, and their attorney general came out like, we just did it. we defeated the Biden mandate.
Yeah, right. Getting the mandate.
At the same time, like, Kentucky's one of the states that's done it the best with this program, and their transportation cabinet has been terrific in getting that pushed along and getting they're the only state that we actually have full clearance on, and so that's something that in the process of things, that's like Kentucky's done it very well. I think states like Colorado, like you're saying, our sites are pretty focused on our little bubble here in the Southeast, but there's other states like some of the other southeastern states that have yet to release a first round, and Kentucky's already on round 3, almost completely having filled all of their AFCs that were required under the program.
Well, that's what. And Jesse, I hope your optimism plays out, right? I really do. But I think the Trump administration is not saying, or Trump specifically, if you take I'm just going off what he says, he's not saying that we need to make this program more efficient. Everything I've heard him say is we need to kill this program. The federal government does not need to do this. So that's why I'm more pessimistic. I would love it.
I would agree. I mean, again, the spectrum could be everything. Since it's our company, I'm hoping on the one side and not on the other. So
no, I get it. And I think the most important,
if the funds have been allocated by Congress and can't be clawed back, then how do you do it the best way possible without? Because he doesn't have the right to just revoke the funds unless he gets all of Congress and House and a huge legislative action in play. But the question is, with that letter, it proves that they want to revamp the face of the program and make it their own. The question is, what do you do in that is legal? And two, and maybe John, you have an insight on that, but what's legal? But then secondarily, what could you do to the program to potentially reface it to make it to where it better aligns with your initiatives? You know what I mean? Because the funds are there, it's passed in the law. It does have to be used for EV charging infrastructure, but how do you revamp the program to make it yours based on what the current is versus what would that look like for the new proposal?
Yeah, I think the new Secretary of Transportation is carrying out, like we said, the new Trump directives in regard to de-emphasizing EVs. And it's within their guidance to issue new guidance. Obviously, it's creating a new hurdle. I think if there's anything substantial to be found about this in regard from a legal standpoint, I think courts are going to go back to Article 1, Section 9, which gives that appropriations power back to Congress, not in regard to an executive order or not in regard to transportation, US DOT or what have you. So I think that there's going to need some time to figure out exactly what all this means. Yes, going back to, I would stress in the interim, many of these projects are going to qualify for tax credits, and that could be used as a backstop. Jesse, I was going to ask you, or maybe Chris, one of the other, for the benefit of Josh's listeners. If I'm a developer and I'm looking at projects, which projects is this likely going to hurt? Because if I say starting in February of 25 right now, this would be impacting projects that I would want to have come online, that I would want to start building in, say, December of this year, and I would want to come online in March of next year. Because there's going to be a time lag, right? Because this federal money, Jesse, I think like we've talked about, federal money is appropriated by Congress, sent to US DOT. DOT sends it to state DOT. State DOT awards it via various rounds like Chris was talking about. And those rounds end up with private installers. So would you say that this is impacting projects that are expected to go live in the next 3 months? Or would you say it's only about 2 years out? What is the impact? I'm looking for the impact of Josh's listeners.
Yeah, I think that is exactly what you're talking about, because you have this money. The process you just named has already happened. The money has been allocated. We've got 3 to 4 years, depending on the state, in the bank right, or in the state's hands right now. So there were the, environmental programs. There were things that we were preparing for. There's multiple states getting ready to do their second round with multiple sites. So the question is, are they going to move forward with it? And the Chris's part, some states might say, look, I don't want to do this. I'm gone. The only reason I don't think that's going to happen is because I don't see a mechanism for to use that 40 million or 60 million or 80 million in their state for anything else. It would go back to potentially just go back to FHWA if it's not used for the purpose that Congress has set it up for. And then I'm going to ask you a question on that. So for me, if it goes back to Congress, you're going to have what, 8 or 9 seats to ensure that it gets voted through and appealed. I think there is so much job creation based on this money and opportunity that they won't get those seats because it benefits too many communities in the red states where those congressional leaders are at. That's just a guess. What is your thought on that?
I would say, from a political standpoint, for a strictly political standpoint, this is the smallest majority that I've ever seen in my life. You know, when you have a number of 219, 220 Republicans, you might have another retirement or appointment or what have you. You're really, really close. And then don't forget, you had those 18 Republicans that signed the letter to Speaker Johnson last year saying, don't touch the IRA. We don't like the way it happened, but don't touch the IRA. And they probably don't like the infrastructure. I think they also mentioned the infrastructure funding as well. I think you nailed it. I think Chris nailed it. The various clean energy initiatives, whether people like them or not, or in DC, are impacting so many communities in swing states and red states that it's going to be extremely difficult for various lawmakers to upend this wholesale or in very many pieces, really at all, before the 26 elections. Yeah, I'm just looking at the political reality. I'm not considering this charger and this solar installation. I'm looking at the political reality. There is no margin for error. No margin for error. Some of these other things that are a little bit more popular, like certain things in regard to immigration and other things, that's easier to get through. This has such a narrow pathway that it's really politically difficult to see anything happening that would be very damaging.
And John, to answer, I think the question directly that you had posed earlier to how does this affect the business and where in the pipeline does it affect? I can say from our business perspective, we've been awarded these projects as part of the allocated funds to the states, but the overreaching ruling that came out yesterday with the federal highway guidance is saying all of the allocated funds are on pause. So only the obligated funds can continue, and there's not a single dollar that we have been awarded that's been obligated to date. And so in the process, the state is given the power to then go award those funds, yes. But then once you get the award selected, which we have been in several states, then you have to work through the contract phase. You have to get the environmental complete for us because we were doing some greenfield developments. Once that's done, then you package all that up, and Federal Highway then has to approve that package from allocated to obligated. And so what that means on the short term is if that specific recension is not rescinded itself, then all of the projects that are in our pipeline are subject to the new NEVI guidelines, which who knows how long that could take. But based on the letter, they're saying that they're going to come out with a new guideline in the spring if they kept that timeline. But then all the states would be required to revamp their state plan, resubmit it, get it approved before they could get any federal highway allocations. And so all current awards would either have to comply, I guess, with that new guideline set, whatever that might be, or
which according to the letter is supposed to come out in the spring, right?
That's what they said, yeah.
Or for public.
Josh,
re-award.
Let me ask another question to John's original question about how it affects. And because I build NEVI style projects, but I don't use NEVI, I know what goes into it. Do you guys only get, let's say, whether it's allocated or obligated, under the previous administration, when do you receive the funds? Do you get progress payments, or do you only receive funds once the stations are commissioned and working?
Every state is different on how they rolled out that plan. But most states were going to be a monthly reimbursement. Some states were at the end of the project. Some states were progress payments. But multiple states that we were working within where you invoice, you get the approval once the federal highway signs off, the funds are obligated, and then monthly you could send invoices and get the reimbursement. Like I said, some states were at completion, you get reimbursements, but that was up to the state to really ultimately determine that specific. And once the funds were obligated, it's just to the state. to turn around and distribute those funds. I don't believe the federal highway had to get involved in those payments.
Take John's question, which is really good about how this affects. So if I'm in your shoes, right, and you're with the state, and now there's uncertainty, and the state say, well, we're going to wait and see. And let's say you're ready to issue a purchase order to an electrical subcontractor to start putting the shovel in the dirt, right? Well, now if a state is saying, well, we're going to wait and see until spring, you're not going to issue that purchase order to the electrical contractor. So you're hurting people who live in the community that these are being built. And I think we've all made the point very well, and it's a hot button issue for me. So Jesse, the conference we were in Atlanta last week, and we had, my friend Tim Eccles, who he runs an EV Brain Trust here in Atlanta. We're actually sponsoring the next one. If anyone's in Atlanta, let me know in the next couple of weeks. But the point I made there, and I continue to hammer this home around other people, in the Atlanta community, is Georgia is one of the leaders in benefiting from manufacturing plants siting in Georgia, and largely due to the Inflation Reduction Act, and also and other federal government programs that encourage clean energy. Right. Well, I'm from Calhoun, Georgia. That's smack in the middle of Marjorie Taylor Greene's district, and yet the largest solar plant in North America, I believe, is Hanwha Q Cells in Dalton, Georgia. Right. I mean, that's in her district, and yet I'm sure she's against clean energy efforts. And so there's this disconnect about clean energy creating jobs that I don't think, as an industry, we do a good enough job hammering home. It's like, this is about job creation and the future of America. I got a bunch of friends from Calhoun who work in construction who benefit from these jobs, and yet it seems like half of the country that's something's not sticking there. Where they're not viewing this as job creation, they're viewing this as woke or DEI, and that's BS. And I think we need to call a spade and say that, and just say, like, hey, this creates jobs. This is good for the country. It's good for local communities. Hard stop.
And I think that's a good thing about this, is it needs to be marketed that way. It needs to show, hey, this is the impact. I think everybody has done a poor job in trying to market the benefit. Is EVs great for everybody? No. There's some people that it is not going to work for. But if you only stay around your house and you drive maybe 40 miles a week or 100 miles a week around your house, it is ideal. No one's really done a good marketing of that. Is there an easy way? And I think that's where Josh and I come in and say, okay, what is the biggest problem with EVs? It's people who don't know if they can make it to the next city if they start getting low. This program is designed to fix that, but I don't think it's ever marketed in like you just put it. Hey, we're going to do this, but it's also going to be the battery backup from this company in Georgia. It's going to be, this manufacturer that is helping with this in North Carolina. It's that part of it that if it makes an effect to the people that need it, I think there's a good way of marketing it. It's just the marketing has not been done. And we've had 3 years to market it, and it was not branded as good for the economy. It was branded good for the environment. I personally see this as a good push to the economy. And it also falls into the all above energy type program that I believe this administration wants to go to. It's, hey, we're going to do oil, we're going to do gas, we're going to do hydrogen. The NEVI program, the IRA put very little interest in hydrogen, and Georgia is one of the leaders in hydrogen development, and you couldn't use NEVI money for any of those hydrogen projects. So even though you have Hyundai in Savannah, how can we were trying to figure out a way to use that. I feel like there's an opportunity to even use this to put hydrogen in there to support places like Georgia in the development of those programs. It's just, I think marketing is going to be your biggest headache. And I don't know who's going to be responsible to brand it that way and say, now it's mine. I'm going to do it America first. Here's EVs, America first.
And
if I could, it sounds like, it sounds like, to answer my question in a little bit more detail, it sounds like it depends on where your listeners, where your developers and installers are in the process. Application, award, allocated, obligated. If they're obligated, they're probably okay. If they're in the first three, they're probably in limbo for a little bit longer. That's kind of what I'm hearing.
It's
going to be okay. Unless Chris or Chris tells me something otherwise, it sounds like the installers are in.
Yeah, and it's going to be a state by state.
Certainly on those first three, it sounds like.
John, I know you have an appointment since we're live here, and the noon hour is past. So if you need to go, we appreciate you being on the podcast again. We'll have you back.
It's lunch hour here in the East Coast. I did want to say our team looks forward to seeing everybody at the EV Charging Infrastructure Summit in Las Vegas, and it's going to be. I think it's going to be even bigger than last year, and I think there's going to be a lot of questions, and I think there's going to be our team and others are going to be able to provide a lot of answers in regard to where's the market now and what do we know, and when will we get answers on what we don't know, right?
Absolutely.
And I'll hop too, guys. I got an appointment as well, but I appreciate the time here, everyone.
Thank you, Chris.
Josh, this is really helpful for me, and it's been a pleasure.
Appreciate you all.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks for everything, guys.
So while they drop off, to get back to the point that you were making, Jesse, I do think that there has been this. It's the reason that we started Turn Down for What as a podcast, was to come out with the narrative of EVs, aren't just environmental consideration. There is the environmental consideration, and depending on how you spin that web, one side might say that the battery harvesting and all this stuff is terrible, but the other side might talk about the saving of carbons and that whole side of things. There is an environmental perspective on EVs, but also there is an economical and there is a community development side to this that is important. Jesse and I really wanted in our company and in our in this podcast specifically to be the one that's talking about the good, the bad, and the ugly of owning an EV, because it's like Jesse said, it's not for every person out there to own an EV today. Maybe at some point in the future that might make the most sense. But one thing I know is, we can generate and make our own electricity. We can make our own oil too, but we're heavily reliant on other countries for oil production currently, and that's something that we can be energy independent. A state can make all of their own fuel for themselves, for their passengers if they so choose. It is an opportunity to be independent.
All about independence.
Independence of energy is something to consider. It is a huge topic and something to actually put into perspective. Number two, economic development. Like we were kind of saying, there's been over $80 billion of investing into the Southeast alone for EV manufacturing. And this is U.S.-based manufacturing to build EVs for American people. And it's something to consider. I mean, there's a lot of investing, a lot of job creation. There will be thousands of jobs outside of Memphis in Tennessee when Blue Oval goes online and starts making the Lightning, the T3, whatever they're going to be producing there. The battery manufacturing in Kentucky will have jobs created. And so taking a step back and taking a step out of all of the politics that have taken place around the EV movement, there is an opportunity just to say, hey, like for me, I bought an EV because it made sense for me. It wasn't, anything outside of, I looked at it, economically it made sense. It's a very nice, cool vehicle comparative to everything else in the market. Cost-wise, it wasn't anything much more significant than my buddy at the time bought a gas-powered Lariat F-150. I bought my Lariat F-150. Our net price, I was cheaper than he was after my tax credit for the same truck. And mine was faster. Mine had more features. And it was just, for me, it made sense. I've saved a ton of money on fuel. I've loved the truck. We had a comment by, I think, Kurt talking about, I'll put it up on the screen, that he wouldn't switch back after his experience in the last 2 years and 64,000 miles on his Lariat DR. I'm the exact same way. I'm at 50-something odd thousand miles. And I would not go back to a gas-powered vehicle. Politics aside, I wouldn't go back to a gas-powered vehicle because I love
my personal next vehicle. We've looked at, if you follow the podcast, Josh and I have looked at the Volkswagen van, great vehicle. We've looked at the Cadillac IQ. We've looked at everything that's out there, the Chevy, the GMCs. My next vehicle will be made in Tennessee and built in Memphis. That is going to be my next vehicle. I have to wait till 2027. It looks like they're going to be producing upwards of 100 of these. I cannot wait to have a made in Tennessee truck in Tennessee. That is my next vehicle, just because I'm so happy. Even with some of the negatives that we've had with growing pains, I still look at my truck that's 2.5 years old now. 2.5 years old truck. They came out of nowhere. They built it. All these other ones that are coming in have had 2.5 years to prepare after Ford released theirs. So, for all of the negatives and things, my truck has done great for me, and I have very rarely had an occasion that I didn't have a charger. And when you start looking at the gap filling that like TVA is doing here recently and some of these other power companies, and some of these side programs that have nothing to do with NEVI that we are exploring, it's even going to put more charging in rural areas, which is why we're excited to participate in those as well. I won't get into details yet because I don't know if it's all public, but there's one that's going to be put in 22 locations with basically a half a NEVI site, 2 chargers, 4 heads. So you have to have a CCS, NACS, and or 2 CCS and a Chatamo. And, we're going to add a NACS to ours, and we're going to try to do 400 kilowatt charging in those areas. That's very high compared to everybody else, but that's what we want to do. We want to provide that ability to use your truck or vehicle in these areas, and we want to have everybody. I want to be able to charge a Tesla there without an adapter. In that deal, we're going to be able to charge Nissans, which are hard today to find a charging port for. So we're still into this on that part, and I really do think that if you take what we're doing with an American First ideal behind it, we are definitely going to be prepared. And this order that's out there is basically just going to go in that direction. Again, how I hope it will be.
Yeah. And it's just, the economics make sense for some people. The benefits of the vehicle itself makes sense. I mean, it's a fun vehicle to drive. I will be forever addicted to the EV torque. But you see a Tesla Plaid take on a Koenigsegg and rip it off the line. It's like, it's the experience that you can't get out of any other vehicle. I haven't got an oil change in 3 years. I rotate my tires every 10,000 miles, and I don't have any ongoing maintenance for my vehicle. That saves, $100 every, 4 or 5 months that I would usually expend. It's the little things like that that just make a difference. And I love my EV vehicle, and it's something that I wouldn't change. And, infrastructure needs to improve. We are still at the early stages of EV adoption, but take all of the things that have been told to you aside. One of Kaiser's points was, look at the truth of the matter. How does it affect to you? What would that implication be to you? Because there's been so many people that I've talked to being here in Tennessee, in a state that, would traditionally, I think, be resistant to some of those things. And it's just a honest conversation of, hey, what is your objection to it? And I don't want to be forced to do it. Okay, great. You're not forced to do it, but does it make sense? And I talk about the benefits, and it's one of those things like, oh, really? Wow. And they get in my truck, they drive it. They're like, this is actually really fun. I'm like, yes, it is. So it's something to take into perspective for yourself. But zooming back out into the federal allocation of funds and kind of how all that looks, I think that there's an opportunity for the administration, to potentially do more with the program, to do more to benefit, community development, benefit American jobs. And I think that should be a priority if you're going to reface. Maybe help remove some regulations and red tape to push infrastructure out better and quicker. Because, obviously, we've been dealing with all the red tape of it. We would love a much more revised program. And at the same time, there needs to be the consideration between, what is been implemented and all the work that's been done by the states, and what could be done and improved to help get the funds better. Because the investing into job creation and the movement that's taken place behind that with OEMs, both domestic and foreign. Hyundai is in Georgia investing billions and billions of dollars into Georgia to do hydrogen vehicles and electric vehicles. That's worth protecting and worth saving. I did the math, but there's been, like I said, 80 billion, but in the state of Georgia alone, since 2022, Hyundai announced their $7.6 billion investment into Georgia. Rivian has a $6.6 billion, partially backed by the Department of Energy. Q Cells had a solar manufacturing, like we had talked about, $1.5 billion. And it's created 16,000 jobs in Georgia alone for just those different programs since 2022. So definitely something to take into consideration. There's an opportunity to take the funds and do more for the American people with it, but also protecting the fact that this is something that benefits significantly the residents and those people that drive EVs, and also those people that just need high-paying technical jobs.
I think if I can just give my wrap-up commentary on a couple things. One, I've got to get a bell for every time Jesse mentions hydrogen. I need to find a sound bite for that. Yeah, I love how you fit that one.
We'll do a drinking game with it.
Drinking game. Two, I always like to point out, people think sometimes like, hey, drill baby drill, we've got all this domestic oil, we're a net positive producer of oil. I think people sometimes don't know the whole picture on that, because we set up our refineries, way back in the 70s. We're not building new refineries. We're expanding them. We're making them more efficient. But they were set up to use heavy crude oil. This is stuff that, forever we've imported in from South America, Venezuela. We've got a lot of stuff from Mexico. We've got stuff coming in from Canada. But a lot of the domestic oil that we are pumping and producing is light sweet crude. This is not what is used at our refineries for the most part, and it's not what goes into your gas tank. There's plenty of other sources and uses for oil. I mean, EVs have a ton of oil in the plastic that's all over these cars. There's oil in everything we do every single day, for lubrication, for manufacturing, for cosmetics, all kinds of stuff. It uses petroleum. But people sometimes have the misnomer. We are still a huge net importer of oil for what we refine. And so to me, it's a win-win when you go electric where it makes sense, right? Tool for the job, right? When you use it for where it is helpful to the gas people that need it. If you're using diesel for long haul trucking, for heavy equipment, you're reducing the whole supply and demand curve, because again, we're not building more of these power stations. We're not building more of these refineries for the most part, right? Not in mass. So we continue to grow in our energy needs for a number of different reasons. And anytime you can reduce the need where it makes sense, solar, wind, hydro, when you can use electric for things that make sense, you should.
Hydrogen.
Yeah, hydrogen. How do I leave hydrogen? I missed that one. Yeah. So yeah, that's my thoughts on that. And I think a big part of the reason that Trump got into office was the extremeness of the way that we swing our policies and our politics. And he's very plain spoken. That can be seen in a number of ways. That can be, in simplicity, that can be ignorance, that can be misinformation, simplicity without nuance and context in detail. It can turn into things that are not true, and speculation and all this stuff. And I think a good illustration of that, though, is someone like me, who's just not nearly as intelligent as someone like Chris and John, and doesn't have any of the experience the two of you guys have in actually doing these things. I get that, strictly speaking, there's no such thing as an EV mandate, right? But my plain ape brain knows that in the company that I work for, we do a lot of things in California that we don't do anywhere else. And maybe it's not strictly speaking a mandate, maybe it's a suggestion and a policy and a direction. But at the end of the day, there's a reason we're doing things in California that we're not doing in Tennessee, where it's the hub of our entire company. And if a mandate by any other name smells as sweet, right? It's not, it's like Shakespeare or whatever, right? But it's maybe you don't call it a mandate, but the reality is that Ford has talked about on their calls that they can sell 17 ICE trucks for every EV they sell. Tesla makes a ton of money selling EV credit swaps. John's entire business is based on EV credit, not EV necessarily, but credit swaps, right?
These clean energy credit swaps, yeah.
Right. So these things, whether you want to call them a mandate or not, these behaviors are happening because at some level, something that isn't a mandate but is a policy, whether that's EPA, whatever that is forcing. I don't know the difference between force and mandate. Maybe I need a source, but it is forcing manufacturers to sell EVs in order to get or to buy the credits. So yeah, I mean, you don't have to Canoe. I mean, all the stuff that the post office bought with Canoe, who's now bankrupt. Do you think that wasn't because there was a mandate at some level? Again, do you plain spoken stupid brain? Maybe it's not legally speaking a mandate, but whatever that was created a behavior that fed into Canoe and Nikola and all of these companies, right? That for every Tesla, there's a Fisker, and so yeah, that's just my commentary on that. Is okay, fine. It's not a mandate, but whatever it is, whatever name you want to call it, sure makes people feel like it is, and it sure changes their behavior. And I'm not saying that's even a bad thing, but it needs to be done differently with a focus on, like you guys are saying, job creation, energy independence. Getting us away from the supply chains of China, whether it's battery, whether it's manufacturing. That's just my commentary on it. Don't call it a mandate, but it's something.
I like how you said one quick thing there, and I'm done. I like the way you said there. You're not as smart as the other two, but for Josh and I, you just don't have the experience. So I kind of understand now. You're saying you're smarter. No, okay, fine. I see how you think about us. And then the second thing, even though in California they may be mandating it, the results is it good or bad for the economy? And you wouldn't have the exodus of companies from that state if the decisions the lawmakers are making are beneficial to the economics of those companies. So though this is a very small part of that, it may be that forcing that you're talking about in your state, because I have no idea, everybody, I'm real good about not talking about crime in New York because I don't know. I've never been to New York and to know what it was like before to now. So I'm not smart enough in that area. You are a Californian. You are there. You see in that industry what can and can't happen. So when you're saying, look, they're forcing things here and then people are leaving, causation isn't correlation. But in that particular case, it shows that a lot of people don't like being told what to do. And if it's not in the economics of their business, they're going to have to go where they can survive.
I think that the key point with the mandate to kind of address that is I don't think that, there was, like Chris said, Kaiser, there's never been a federal mandate. But if you look at the EPA and some of the surrounding entities and what their pressure and recommendations have been on the OEMs and some of that wording, there's been tailpipe emissions, regulations, there's been proposal for those type of things that shift that balance over toward make the OEMs make it. Not people wouldn't have to buy it, but if it's the only thing being made, that's kind of like the conversation point. So it's something that, like I said, there's the consideration for all the different pieces. It's not just a simple clear cut yes or no. And yet it's something that there needs to be that consideration for how do you navigate those waters in a way that respects everybody and their opinions, but also continues to promote the Americans, the American people's best interest. And so, we're doing our part on our side to continue to promote that. And hopefully that's something that we can kind of see continue to evolve. But, like Jesse said, we are all located in, different areas and get to kind of experience a different set of things and a different set of viewpoints. And being in California is a totally different thing than being in Tennessee. And that's something that we, have built our company out of that perspective, because our entire Southeast network has a totally different viewpoint than the West Coast would have on the EVs. And so we approach that in a different way. And yet in California and in the Southeast and in the North, it's all the same thing. If there's an economic benefit that helps American people, that should be something we all agree on. And, if everybody's getting better with it, then that's something that we all win with. But yeah, so there has been an hour and 20 minutes of
great conversation, though.
Yeah, I think it's been good and productive conversation. If anybody currently listening has any thoughts or feedback, you're welcome to comment, and we can have a last minute chit chat on those things. But thank you for tuning along to this journey. Anybody have any other final thoughts?
No, I love hearing this stuff. I love hearing the experts talk about it. I'm hoping that Trump, being a transactional guy that he is and hyperbolic guy that he is, that all of this gets worked out. I'm hoping that the politics around it and the jobs and everything that Jesse mentioned really come into play. I do hope people start seeing this through the lens of domestic jobs, domestic energy, domestic manufacturing. I do think that, you know, China being our frenemy, or whatever you want to call these guys, the more stuff that we can onshore, the more that we can have this stuff, I just think it's all good. So, like I say, I don't understand all the intricacies like these guys do, but I love hearing about them. And I think it's a conversation we need to have to clear up what we can.
It's going to be huge. The MAGA charging system, it's going to be better than they could have ever done.
Huge.
It's going to be we're going to go in, we're going to make charging great.
Beautiful chargers.
Beautiful chargers. It'll be beautiful, the best chargers. It'll be the Riviera of charging. You know, you'll just be able to go down and charge, and it's going to be fantastic. That's what I hope
people
for.
People are saying the power up chargers, they're going to be great. People are saying.
I'm not saying who those people are, but yes. So yeah.
I said so. So you know that counts for something.
It's job creation. Job creation. Side effect's going to be economic impact, or the key is economic impact. The side effect is going to be reduction of carbon. Let's get those jobs going. We've got a lot of companies that invested here. Let's protect those jobs, and let's go towards the technological advancements. My truck gets an average about 80 to 85 miles a gallon. If you did it in the math for how much I'm saving, that's a good thing. How can we get these vehicles cheaper, and how can we create jobs while doing it? It's all above board, all energy, all sources. Let's try to make everything independent.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Since 2022, just as a final point, because I wanted to look this up, state-specific data, since 2022, there's been approximately 144,000 clean energy jobs created. In North Carolina, there's been 86,000. In Virginia, there's been 78,000. In Tennessee, there's been 73,000. And in Georgia, there's been 66,000. So
that's pretty even spread.
Yeah. But the key there is you're saying clean energy. And a lot of those jobs are medium voltage, so they should just be jobs, electrician jobs. It should be work. That's the key. Don't separate the two. We're making jobs by having these.
That's the benefit, though, is as this, you know, the manufacturing and things ramps up, there's more jobs being created that rural kids can get technical degrees or technical training and go out and do these jobs as an electrician, go out and do these installing and manufacturing and whatever that different job type is. They can get and be able to grow and have an opportunity that they wouldn't have before because the economic benefit from this extra additional manufacturing. Car manufacturing has been done in Michigan, and so the North has gotten to benefit from that and everything around Detroit. But the EV space is being manufactured in the Southeast. So that's why we're excited about the Southeast and what we're doing in the Southeast, because that's so much economic benefit to our region because all those companies are making those investments here, which creates all the jobs locally. So
big, beautiful jobs.
Well, we certainly thank everybody for coming along with us for this conversation. Thanks for all the comments from Kurt and Marty and Anthony and Giddy Up. I love that name, Giddy Up. Yeah, thanks for Chris and John. And these are the conversations that really get me excited to do these things, because talking to these folks and seeing this perspective, talking to these people that I've only seen on, you know, X and LinkedIn and different places, to really chat more in depth about it is a privilege. So I certainly appreciate that. It's been a great one.
And if you watch this whole thing and we're no longer live, comment below, message us, whatever your thoughts, and we will bring that up next week and have that discussion. We love to have sharp and tough conversations because, you know, iron sharpens iron, and brushing the rough edges kind of helps us get a better understanding of where we're all headed. And so I want all perspectives, whether that's positive or negative, based on what we've talked about today. Share it. You know, Anthony thinks it's naive that we think that it could be about jobs and government efficiency. Hey, I respect it. I mean, that's something that we want everybody's perspective. Tell us your take. What do you think is going to happen? What do you think the current guidance is? What do you think it's going to be? What are the timeframes? Because we are all in the process of identifying that and working to navigate those waters the best we can. So, yeah, stay tuned for more EV updates. If you don't follow Turn Down for What, we're on YouTube and all the different streaming platforms. We will go live sometimes like this on LinkedIn and X But if you don't follow us on any of the platforms, and we do EV reviews. We have some EV reviews on the YouTube channel. We just recently did an ID Buzz EV bus. It's a very cool vehicle. Check out that review. I got a new camera mic set up for our mobile, so it sounded tremendously better than our other EV reviews we've done. But we also have dialogue like this weekly, and every Thursday night we have a live stream with our technical guys, Martin and Jason. Last night was a really insightful conversation. So just follow us along. There's a lot of fun stuff happening. If you're just generally curious about the EV space, tune in to Turn Down for What for more EV news and updates. So it's been another insightful episode. Thank you, everyone, for your time and tuning in with us for an hour and a half. And we will see you next week.
See you guys.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to Turn Down for What. Make sure you're subscribed with your notifications on to tune in to more EV news and updates. See you next time.